Happy Friday, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Hope you're doing well. We are certainly doing well. Another, what would appear to be head-to-head win in recruiting for Georgia against Florida. We'll have some fun. We'll celebrate that. Jeff Sintel will also be in the program to let us know if UGA is indeed on commitment watch again before this week is done, and some of those other twists and turns that are out there when it comes to this 2020 class, including what I think is some interesting news, although at least from the perspective of this program, not unexpected news involving five-star running back Zack Evans. I kind of combined a couple different recruits into one right there. Nonetheless, it's going to be a great show. We're glad you're a part of it. Jeff Sintel later on. A whole lot from you in terms of question and comments throughout as well. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is presented by Kroger. More ways to save fresh food, low prices at Kroger.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you are a Gator hater, there is a chance that life has never been better, at least in a very long time. Off-season-wise, I don't know that it's ever been more fun for those Georgia fans who do not like the Florida Gators, myself included, obviously, to really watch Kirby Smart. The phrase that we've talked about before when he said after Mullen's going to, kind of run his mouth and say things, talking about quarterback recruiting and all these things that Mullen has seemingly alluded to when it comes to Kirby. Kirby says that Georgia does its talking with its helmets. Well, another example of that again, it would seem, with Georgia getting the commitment of four-star wide receiver Marcus Rosemy in what would appear to be another head-to-head win for Georgia over Florida. Yeah, there you see Marcus Rosemy, for those of you watching on video, his tweet announcing the news, and that's obviously great news for Georgia. And listen, y'all know by now we got Eddie on the desk here. We've talked about the Gator Hater Updater for a long time. We are going to do the Georgia-Florida angle on this because I do think that's really fun. However, I do feel the need, though, to start off by talking about something different. To start off by not talking about, this is Kirby Smart rubbing Dan Mullen's face in it. This is Georgia beating up Florida for another recruit. We'll get there, I promise you that. But I want to start off with something a little bit different, because I think what Rosemy actually represents, in addition to Georgia going into the Sunshine State and pulling out another player the Gators would have loved to have had, I think this kind of shows you a continued pattern of Georgia getting involved with wide receivers that until recently Georgia just was not that involved with. It's one of the reasons why many of y'all mock me for how much I spent time a year ago talking about Jaden Hazelwood before Hazelwood ultimately chose Oklahoma, and George Pickens before Pickens ultimately chose UGA. But the reason why I was so obsessed with those guys, and the reason why I was so thrilled when Dominic Blaylock also remained rock solid to Georgia throughout that entire time, is because wide receiver was one of those positions where Georgia had just been kind of locked out of the top prospects. For a long stretch of time, post A.J. Green, post 2009, had not been signing five-star receivers, not even signing top 10 receivers in the country at that position. Georgia had been settling for less than that, the wide receiver position. Now, a lot of those guys came in and performed well at UGA. You can't deny that. But in terms of the elite recruiting that we've seen in a lot of positions, even under Kirby Smart, wide receivers was one of the positions that kind of took a while to get to that kind of elite status. I think Marcus Rosemy, along with the crop of guys that Georgia brought in a year ago, signifies that now Georgia recruits the receiver position as much as it recruits any other position in terms of the very best prospects in the country, the truly elite guys. That's part of what Rosemy means. In fact, I mentioned A.J. Green a moment ago. I talked to Green about this very subject a few months ago. Back during the winter, he was in Athens in honor of the Super Bowl being in Atlanta, and we talked about that in the time of, hey, I know Georgia runs the ball, and I know Georgia recruits these big offensive linemen, and that's the nucleus of this program, but is this still a good place for wide receivers to be too? And A.J. Green did not mince words with his thoughts, but the guys that have followed in his footsteps in terms of Georgia at that position and will do so in the future. Here's what A.J. Green said about that.
Oh, of course, yeah. You just got to capitalize on your opportunities whenever it's called. But I feel like young kids these days, they all want to be in that five receiver offense, getting a lot of balls, getting 100 balls. But sometimes it's just if you got a great offensive line, great running backs, man, you get a lot of one-on-one out there. So I think if any receiver you want to come to Georgia, it's a great opportunity.
And the point is now other receivers seem to be buying in to what A.J. Green was saying there. George Pickens proved that at the end of the last recruiting cycle. Marcus Rosemy proves it right now. Jeff Sintel will join us here in a couple of minutes. We'll talk to him live more about his feelings on Rosemy. But let me play you a short clip from Jeff not too long ago, kind of putting into words just how good of a player this is. Forget for a moment this is fun to beat up on Florida and steal another recruit for the Gators. Forget that just for a moment. Think about how good Rosemy actually is in his position, and think about what a door that's been unlocked for Georgia in terms of recruiting these kinds of players, the wide receiver position. Here is Jeff.
I know sometimes people like to hear about the ratings. Well, folks don't realize how close Marcus Rosemy out of St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale is to being a 5-star. He's the nation's number 6 receiver, a type of body that will remind folks of J.J. Holloman, Jeremiah Holloman, one of those ideal replacement type prospect targets that could kind of fill a vacating role for the program.
Jeff Sintel says people don't realize just how close he is to being a 5-star. I think that's really good news, and I think this is the kind of player that Georgia needs as it looks to make the wide receiver position just as deep as any other position group on this roster. I think this is a big win for Kirby Smart. But then you do get to the fun stuff. The idea that this was another beat up for Georgia against Florida and another head-to-head situation in which Kirby Smart just, recruits all over Dan Mullen. A lot of y'all were mentioning this to me on Twitter. Raymond Brandon sent me a tweet in particular that I want to point out here of what I guess some opposing fans are saying about this. Raymond writes in to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and he says, BA, how do you feel about this take on Kirby trolling Mullen? And there's a site called Clemson Recruiting News, and what they write about Rosemy is they say that Rosemy's not the first prospect in 2020 to commit to UGA shortly after naming Florida as a finalist. Some clear propaganda, the word is, being used by Kirby Smart and the Dogs here, as it seems like retaliation for all the comments Mullen has made since last season. So that's what a Clemson fan site, recruiting site says about what Georgia's doing to Florida right now. And I have to admit, and I may be wrong about this, I'm wrong frequently, but I have to admit, when you look at Marcus Rosemy in the context of Warren Brinson, in the context of the things that Carson Beck said about how he was just using the Florida offer to get the offer he really wanted from Georgia, and some of the other things that have gone on between Georgia and Florida in recruiting this offseason, I do believe it's intentional, and I do believe it's deliberate, and I do believe it's having the designed effect. It's making Mullen look really bad across the college football landscape and making him look terrible in his own state, in which that he cannot beat Kirby Smart out for prospects that Georgia wants. I'm talking about in the fertile soil that Florida ought to dominate. Not nationwide where Georgia's doing most of its recruiting, but in Florida in particular, Dan Mullen can't even win right now for Georgia against Georgia for those recruits right now. And I do think this has been designed to set it up this way. The reason I feel confident saying that is because of something that another recruiting expert said in our program recently. I asked Jeremy Birmingham, who covers Ohio State recruiting. At the time, it was thought that Ohio State might be in the mix on Marcus Rosemy a little bit. We knew that Georgia was involved here, but I asked him how much Dog fans ought to worry about Florida in this. Now, think about this. This came down to a Georgia-Florida battle, supposedly, but as recently as a couple of weeks ago, people who knew this recruitment pretty well had kind of disregarded Florida's entire chance of being in this at all. Here's what Jeremy Birmingham said.
Now, Florida's in the discussion because they're in Florida. From everything I've heard for months on Marcus Rosemy, this is a 2-team race between Ohio State and Georgia. Georgia has the advantage right now because he's been to Georgia. He's never been to Ohio State. The Buckeyes have tried over and over in the last year to get him up for a visit, but family situation down there isn't always great, and his money is tight, so he hasn't been able to make an unofficial trip. But if he doesn't make that visit in June unofficially, I don't think that there's any real shot down the road for him to end up in the Buckeyes class, and I think that would push him to Georgia.
So listen, back then, Jeremy Birmingham said, I don't think Florida's really in this. So when you sort of magically see him take the Florida visit and it's down to Georgia versus Florida for that choice, boy, hard not to imagine this being another setup to make the Gators look bad. And based on the way this plays out, it seems that's exactly the way that it went down. Now, I don't know that for sure, but it's obviously got the strong scent of this and the strong look of this. Now, what was really funny is I got a lot of comments in regards to, after what Warren Brinson did and what Rosemy's done now, of maybe all the recruits need to do this. Philip used an example of this on Twitter, who I thought was pretty funny, who said, is there any way we can get Zack Evans to take an official visit to Florida? It seems like taking the official visit to Florida locks up folks to end up coming to Georgia. Philip Hughes says Mullen for president, which I think is really funny. So listen, there are two overall takeaways here. Rosemy is an incredible prospect prospect in his own right. I think this is a really good-looking wide receiver and another example of just how much better Georgia has gotten at wide receiver recruiting as of late. And yet, at the same time, it's really fun to watch Georgia beat up on Florida in recruiting, especially when the setup is seemingly so stark right now of Georgia getting whoever it wants and leaving Florida fans to gnash teeth about why they cannot do the same thing. As I said at the start of the program, if you're a Gator hater, this spring and summer has been awful fun for you. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Radio at Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Speaking of our friends at Kroger, I invite you to get grilling with fresh flavors all summer long. They're at your local Kroger. They've got everything you need for barbecues, cookouts, everything else, meats, chips, side dishes, everything in between. Check that out at your local Kroger. I'll also invite you, I mentioned the world-famous DawgNation.com a moment ago. I'll invite you to go to the world-famous DawgNation.com, find out more details about DawgNation Days of Summer. In our next big event, when we're at Thursday, August 1st, at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. VIP opportunities are available. You can be a part of our reception there that night that starts at 5 p.m. You can get some special gifts and some giveaways, courtesy of DawgNation, but you've got to act right now. We've only got a limited number of these rooms left, so go to DawgNation.com to find out more details about that. Thursday, August 1st, at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. That is going to be an incredible time. All right, I mentioned Jeff Sintel a moment ago. We'll get Jeff here on our program in just a little bit. We'll talk to him about Marcus Rosemy. We'll talk to him about one that may have gotten away in terms of a quarterback and a whole lot more. That's with Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a few minutes. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here on this Friday, presented by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. And I was looking at some stuff. I've joked before, I like lists, and I've talked a lot about lists on the show the last couple of days. One in particular is Paul Meyerberg's list at USA Today, where he's been ranking all the top guys at the various position groups. I talked about DeAndre Swift and where he ranks among the running backs. I think we've done Jake Fromm at some point in time. I just like this kind of stuff. I like preseason content along these lines. Well, looking at the list of top wide receivers and tight ends, there is really something that jumps out at you in terms of Georgia's competition for a national championship. And this is where you got to give credit where credit's due. It's one of the reasons why I get excited when a guy like Marcus Rosemy commits to Georgia, because right now it seems like the best teams have elite wide receivers, and Georgia's working to build that on its own roster. Teams like Alabama and Clemson have seemingly already done that. Now, there's no shortage of rankings of the top wide receivers, so your mileage may vary. But when it comes to what Paul Meyerberg and USA Today pointed out, do you know that on the top 10 list of receivers in the country, according to Paul Meyerberg, USA Today, there are 2 guys from Alabama and 2 guys from Clemson. Jalen Waddle and Jerry Jeudy make it for the Crimson Tide. I think Jeudy was number 1 overall. And for Clemson, it's obviously T. Higgins and Justin Ross. Now, Devontae Smith for Alabama, or was it Henry Ruggs? One of the two just missed the cut for being also in that top 10 when it comes to Paul Meyerberg. So you think about this just for a moment. That if Georgia's going to go head-to-head and win a game against an Alabama, go head-to-head, win a game against a Clemson, they are going to have to do so against not just one of the best receivers in the country, but according to many of the preseason publications, including USA Today right here, they are going to have to go head-to-head against multiple top 10 receivers in the country. We've seen this with our own eyes. We've seen T. Higgins and Justin Ross, how they perform for Clemson in big games. Georgia fans have had to go head-to-head against this crop of Alabama receivers in the past. It's one of the reasons why when I think about postseason success for Georgia this year, winning the SEC, getting back to the college football playoff, knocking off the reigning national champion in Clemson, it's one of the reasons why we talk so much about the Georgia secondary. And obviously the Georgia secondary is a really interesting position group for Georgia right now because it's also having to try to find a way to stay strong and maybe even improve, despite the fact it lost last year's Thorpe Award winner, the nation's top defensive back, DeAndre Baker. The good news is, and we've talked about this a good bit, I think Connor Riley's even written about this at DawgNation.com. We've certainly mentioned this on air from time to time, that it seems like Georgia actually left the spring feeling pretty good about that position group. And the one thing that Kirby Smart knows about this group is apparently he thinks they can run with anybody. Here is what Kirby said during the spring about this secondary that could be facing a big task in the biggest games the Dogs play this season.
We've had a good spring. I don't know if that's a credit to the young secondary or whether that's a lack of depth at receiver. Probably didn't have our best day today. We gave up some plays on the back end. I mean, more than we did the last week. But those kids grow. They're growing. I mean, what you know is we've got what we're going to have. There's nobody else coming, so it's very unique that we have depth and we're able to move people around and try to figure out the best parts. And, you're really trying to get the guys that don't know what they're doing to be able to do that. There's a few guys that have played a lot of snaps here with the likes of Stokes and Tyson and JR and even Richard. Those 4 guys played a lot of snaps. So we're trying to get those other guys ready to go play. And the good thing is they're here to get these reps. I think that's going to pay off for us in the fall. I think we have the potential to have a very fast secondary. I don't know how instinctive we are yet. I don't know how great we are at playing the ball, but we do have some speed back there.
So listen, you hear Kirby Smart right there. It sounds like he likes this group pretty well, and he certainly liked the fact they had a chance to all go through spring practice. In some form or fashion, every Georgia fan at every cookout, everything you do this summer, it's can Georgia win the national championship? All Dog fans have some version of that conversation this offseason. My point here in Around the Doghouse presented by Merriweather and Tharp today is to say, when you're having those discussions with your own friend group, think about this UGA secondary. I believe that's one of the most significant issues. And I think this group has a chance to be really good. But that's one of the most significant issues facing the Dogs in determining can they truly get over the hump in 2019 because of how good the Clemson receivers are in a potential matchup, and Alabama's there as well. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And listen, one of the things I love about Merriweather and Tharp are all the free resources they provide. Divorce is a scary situation. If you're dealing with it, it's the kind of thing that you may not quite know how you're going to get through it all. Well, that's why Merriweather and Tharp provides thousands of free web pages, a lot of podcasts, divorce guides, so much more to help you better understand the divorce process. And, of course, those attorneys are also just a phone call away for that free initial consultation. My best advice to you, if this is a situation that you're dealing with, go to this website, theatlantadivorceteam.com, theatlantadivorceteam.com. I think you'll find the folks at Merriweather and Tharp are set up to truly help you. All right, it's DawgNation Daily today, presented by Kroger. We've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up, including some good news for a Georgia player drafted last night. We'll do that later on. But now, let's get ready to talk to our buddy, Jeff Sentell.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we will say hello to Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. It's already been a busy week for UGA recruiting. It may be even busier to come. We'll let Jeff give us all the details on that. We may even talk a little bit about one that might have gotten away. So let's welcome in Jeff Sentell to the program right now. Jeff, welcome into DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here on this Friday. Hope you're doing well and hope you're set up for a fun weekend.
Hey, Brandon, man, I'm great. Hello to you. Hello to the DawgNation World Headquarters and everybody out there listening and streaming, and also a big tip of the cap to Mike and Connor behind the glass, who make you sound so smart and so informed every single day.
That's exactly right, Jeff. Well said on that. So let me talk about Marcus Rosemy, and let me talk about him on two fronts, kind of like I mentioned before you joined us. First of all, as a player, I think because I'm talking about me here, other Georgia fans really like the head-to-head stuff with Florida. I think it's easy to obscure what Marcus Rosemy is as a player, because you can get quickly fixated on, wow, Georgia's going down to Florida and just taking every player that it wants. And I think the most important part of the Marcus Rosemy news, the four-star receiver that committed to Georgia yesterday, is, Jeff, it was not that long ago that Georgia did not get receivers like this. I mean, even under Kirby Smart, there was a time in which Georgia just was not recruiting the receiver position like this. You've said on previous broadcasts that you think Rosemy's close to a 5-star. I think he's, the number 6 overall receiver in the country as it is. I mean, you and I both have talked plenty about that long drought of Georgia not signing any top 10 receivers, and it lasted way too long. It seems commonplace now because of how the 2019 class ended. But this Rosemy recruitment a couple of years ago would have been treated as a huge deal because of just how big of a drought that Georgia had when it came to what I'm going to call an elite wide receiver.
Yeah, I think it gets lost on Brandon folks a little bit that, the 2019 class, we're going to probably have to chalk that one up as the spoil you year for Georgia recruiting. Because outside of the 2019 class, Marcus Rosemy, this commitment from Marcus Rosemy would be the highest-rated receiver Georgia has signed since Marlon Brown in 2009. And I think that gets lost on folks in the old imagery of Georgia, Florida, Georgia, yada, yada, yada. I just think it's very interesting with Marcus. Here you have a player who performed for a state champion last year. I think he caught about 38 balls for right around 800 yards, 8 touchdowns. But the big thing to think about here is he did it in South Florida for a program that won another state title, that has won 10 state titles at St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, that's where the Bosa brothers came from. That's where Geno Atkins came from. And he also did so as a big play weapon, averaging 20 yards per catch, 20.6 yards per catch. 6'2", 187 pounds. He's going to be at the opening. He runs the 40-yard dash in under 4.6. That's on the laser time. So Marcus Rosemy's checking a lot of boxes there for Georgia. The big thing for him is he cited a family environment in Athens.
Yeah, you love to see that, and I kind of half joked, half serious about this before you joined us, that we had people on this show a couple of weeks ago telling us that Florida was not a serious factor for Marcus Rosemy. So when it comes down to, as a lot of people thought this week, hey, Georgia versus Florida for Marcus Rosemy, Jeff, I'm sorry, that does have the look to me of a setup. And I enjoy that. I mean, if you want to spin the narrative that a lot of people are of this is Georgia plotting another way to kind of get back at Florida for some of the things that have been said this offseason, it's hard not to draw that conclusion when it wasn't that long ago that you had some serious people saying, I'm not so sure how much Marcus Rosemy seriously considering Florida. I mean, this does have a little bit of a look of a setup and maybe a little bit of a talk with your helmet moment for Georgia after a little bit of a boastful offseason and kind of a outspoken, noisy, obnoxious offseason from Florida. This feels like almost intentional revenge for that, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, it's a little scary that Brandon Adams is in my head a little bit, but what I'm going to say here is a line that you folks might see around a lot, especially on DawgNation.com and other pages. But instead of that talking with your helmets type stuff, it looks like Georgia and Kirby Smart are talking with the recruiting classes, and they're talking with these commitments because, I mean, this is not an episode out of Stranger Things, although it feels like it, where you've got, I think you start with Carson Beck, and there is a litany, which our good buddy Connor Riley has documented on the pages of DawgNation.com, to where Georgia has went head-to-head or seemingly been head-to-head with Florida in a fight for these recruits. And it's ended up kind of like a no-moss situation with Georgia landing another one. I mean, Rosemy, he just said he felt at home there. There's a family atmosphere. He called it unbelievable. He said it just felt right. And then you have Carson Beck, the quarterback of this class in 2020, who was very excited about the news yesterday, landing one Marcus Rosemy because he liked the young man's hands, he liked the young man's size, and he liked just simply how fast he was, too.
So let me talk to you about another potential receiver right now. It's a guy that we talked about on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on Wednesday. That's Cory Wren, listed as an athlete by the recruiting services, and yet it seems like he's intent on playing the receiver position, and it seems like that's what Georgia's recruiting him to play. I know he's got a decision scheduled for today. He's put that out on social media, 7 p.m. Central Time, which I guess gets you to 8 p.m. Eastern for the announcement there from Wren. Is UGA on commitment watch again for this? Because, boy, based on some of the things you've written about Wren and some of the audio that we shared on Before the Hedges on Wednesday, it seems like Mr. Wren's got a pretty good relationship with UGA.
Yeah, it's funny, Brandon. In the forum today, folks are getting down with their slide rules and their calculators and their linear equations, and they're bringing up terms called the Corrales effect to try and determine what's the difference between a guy that runs 4.3 over 40 yards and a guy that runs 4.4 over 40 yards. The difference most folks are determining, their scientific conclusion there, is that's about 1 yard. So when one guy is at the goal line, his pursuer perhaps is right at the 1 yard line in terms of distance, and that might be all an accurate passer like a Jake Fromm or even a Carson Beck down the line here needs to score another 6 points for the Bulldogs. I think Wren is a guy, he runs in the beer. He runs in the high school offense at John Curtis, which is kind of like Valdosta in Georgia high school football terms. He carries the ball a lot, Brandon. He had over 80 carries last year for almost 800 yards. Very willing to play all over the place. He told me, should the choice be Georgia, he'd want to play gunner for Kirby Smart. He wants to be seen as more than that speed demon guy receiver. He wants to be the guy that goes and runs crisp routes. He wants to high-point balls. I think things here with Georgia and Cory Wren really got interesting when Cortez Hankton went down during the spring evaluations, these in-person evaluations that we see every year that kind of shapes Georgia's recruiting class, maybe away from a higher-rated guy and those early names, and maybe more towards what's real and what Georgia really needs in its offense. And Wren told me that Hankton thought he was 5'6" or 5'7", so when he saw he was a 5'9.5", probably means he's right at 5'9", and then 176 pounds, he began to look more like a tool, a potential tool in the Georgia's offense, and also a real name to consider for the 2020 recruiting class.
So to ask you a blunt question here, if Cory Wren were to commit to Georgia tonight, is that the end of A.J. Henning as a Georgia prospect? Does that close the door? Because, I mean, you said yourself, Georgia may take 6 offensive linemen. I want 2 running backs. You start adding all this kind of stuff up, knowing this is a year where Georgia almost for sure takes south of 25, scholarships for the class of 2020. Does the presence of Wren eliminate a spot for A.J. Henning?
Well, that would seem to be the case, Brandon. I know you're always quick to you're Cory Wren on the starting blocks in terms of dismissing or swiping right on a lot of these potential recruiting cases here. But we know A.J. Henning is taking his official visit to Michigan this weekend. We know he had a wonderful official visit to Georgia. We know that official visit and the program fit there was mom approved for A.J. Henning. But there's also a lot of Michigan maize and blue in his blood, and he's going to take another official visit this weekend. It could simply be a matter of timing here, Brandon, where one guy's ready to get it done, and the other guy's a little bit more uncertain. And when you're talking about the guy that's ready is actually, as we just kind of discussed earlier, maybe a step or two faster than the other guy, and Georgia's really looking for a speed receiver. All this then becomes very interesting.
So let me talk to you about another guy here for a moment. I'm wrong about plenty, but on this one, I feel like I'm going to have to take a bow for being 100% right, although I've never been less happy about being right. There are a number of news outlets. I think a Rivals guy tweeted this. I think the Austin American-Statesman wrote about this, that Zack Evans, I guess, took an unofficial visit to Texas here this week, despite the fact that of his top 5 finalists, Texas was not one of those. This would lead me to believe something I've suspected all along, Jeff, that these in-state schools were going to get back involved with Evans, and not including them as his list of finalists was only a way to, I guess, get recruited harder by them. That's my assumption on this. What do you make of the fact that it has been reported that Evans visited Texas again this week, despite the fact that at one point in time it would have at least appeared to some that Evans had been eliminated, that the Longhorns and the Aggies had been eliminated?
Well, Brandon, I know this will probably discourage you a little bit, but sometimes when these guys set their top 4s and top 5s, it doesn't mean that they do not look at everyone else. It doesn't mean that they limit their recruiting processes to just those schools. I mean, heck, man, there's 8 home games in a year for a kid, for 8 Saturday home games for a year for a young man to go check out a lot of these schools. Texas and Texas A&M, it was a major upset to a lot of people that neither of those schools made it in the Final 5 there for Zachary Evans. And also you see, a school like Oklahoma, who's already, covered up with 2 elite running back prospects now committed to the class. And then you see a school like Ohio State that was all in on a couple of other backs, including one, Kendall Milton, more than Zachary Evans. So you just kind of feel, it really kind of feels to me like that top 5 for Zachary Evans isn't really a top 5 anymore. That maybe another name like a Texas that you just imagined up there could sneak in and then draw some late final consideration.
Yeah, because, I mean, I've said this before on the show that I think that if it was truly just the 5 finalists, and include Kendall Milton in Georgia's class here for a moment, I think if it's just those 5 finalists, I think that Georgia could go head-to-head for those other 4 and have a pretty good chance of winning head-to-head for Zachary Evans. I do, for a number of reasons, which I won't get into right now. But once you open it back up to the in-state schools again, given the fact that this is just such a big-name recruit, been doing it at a high level there in Houston, I think it becomes a much more difficult recruitment for Georgia. And in a weird way, I think the fact that he did not include Texas or Texas A&M in the finalist list almost means that emotionally he may feel an even stronger connection to them because he was trying to move them off the block to get them to show him, I guess, the love that he wanted to be shown.
Wow. Brandon's really going deep into this one right here. It could simply be this, Brandon, that instead of hanging around and playing Fortnite, or instead of hanging around and playing wiffle ball in the backyard with his friends or just playing some hoops, that Zachary Evans had a free afternoon and he thought, why not go to Texas and get treated like five-star royalty for another visit just to make sure? Maybe he had a teammate or two in tow. The other thing to think about here with Zachary Evans is the name Don Chaney Jr. Everybody wants to quickly ask, if it's not Evans, Milton is the name that everybody seems to center on right now. Evans right now seems one of those that might be the odds makers might think Georgia might have a tougher time of landing Evans and Milton, especially since Evans wasn't at G-Day. Evans hasn't made a pronounced official visit over the summer or early spring, late spring, which is what it's really been. The names that start to pop up, I know everybody thought about Kobe Pryor. The name Tag Bixby still is readily on everyone's mind as an in-state homegrown running back. But there's another young man down in South Florida named Don Chaney Jr.
Yeah.
He's rated, I think, the nation's number 6 running back. Currently committed to Miami. He's currently the crown jewel of the Manny Diaz class down there in Miami. Top 40 prospect as well. But that might be a name that Georgia circulates and gets into the business with a little bit, depending on how things weather out over the summer with one Zachary Evans. I think the main thing to look for with Zachary Evans and Georgia fans and the hopes here is that late July visit, that sliver of time of a matter of days between dead periods in August and the dead period that's going to take up most of July. If Zachary Evans is at Georgia for that late July period, I think that's when that might be a sign that Georgia is a true stakeholder in this thing, even though he might potentially hold his official visit for the fall.
Okay, can we do some kind of keeping it real talk here at the end of our conversation when it comes to Brock Vandagriff, the quarterback from Athens, or the Athens area anyway, that committed to Oklahoma here this week? On the one hand, this would not seem to be the world's biggest loss because it seems like Georgia likes Caleb Williams a lot, the quarterback from up there in that Beltway area. Georgia's in on a 2022 quarterback. Georgia feels good about its 2020 quarterback situation. On the other hand, it kind of pushed the Marcus Rosemy button yesterday on the aftermath of Vandagriff committing to Oklahoma, which seemed to almost have the appearance of let's change the news cycle up just a little bit. How big of a loss is it for Georgia that a quarterback for 2021 out of its own backyard chose to go be a part of that quarterback factory at Oklahoma and not sticking around to be a part of the Georgia class? How big of a loss for the Dogs is this, Jeff?
I don't think it's a big loss because I don't think Georgia had invested in Vandagriff as much as Oklahoma has. Let's keep this very real. Oklahoma, over its last 2 years, has produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners and 2 number 1 overall draft picks at quarterback. Oklahoma had only offered 1 quarterback in the 2021 class, period, and that was Brock Vandagriff. And they weren't moving off that stance until Brock Vandagriff moved away from Oklahoma. Another thing to consider is Oklahoma signed the nation's number 1 quarterback in 2019, and they are not pursuing a quarterback in the 2020 class. So they have that 1 year of separation to worry about. Meanwhile, Georgia had not had the same druthers with his 2021 recruiting classes at quarterback. They had offered Vandagriff. They had offered Williams. I am extremely high on the stock of Williams and what he could potentially be. Let's all remember, Williams was at Georgia for G-Day wearing a Georgia sweatshirt. He also came back to Georgia camping earlier this month when Georgia was bringing a lot of guys in and working out a lot of guys. And Georgia has been up to see Caleb Williams a lot already as well during the spring evaluation period. And so it seems like Williams is the guy. Right now, he's the guy. And it seems like when you compare Oklahoma's tradition and pedigree at quarterback and Georgia, and with the fact that Oklahoma was all in, it makes sense that Oklahoma won this recruiting race.
So I think Connor Riley even had the tweet that he showed earlier, or maybe I saw it before the show started. I mean, Williams has got a Georgia uniform as his Twitter header right now. Now, sometimes this kind of stuff doesn't mean a ton, but obviously, when you look at the arm strength, when you look at the sort of speed, the athleticism, Williams is a pretty impressive player to like. But once again, to kind of keep with our theme of candor, is this a situation where Georgia has gone all in on Williams because it was out on Vandegrift, or did Georgia sort of get involved with Williams independent of Oklahoma's relationship with Vandegrift?
I just think they liked all these guys in the class, and they weren't really ready to settle on just one of those guys. Remember, Georgia just had Vandegrift and Caleb Williams in town in the camp setting earlier this month, so they really got their eyeball-to-eyeball evaluations. And folks, Georgia does not need to hit the gas pedal at all with trying to rush on a 2021 quarterback, because they have such a bona fide future star in Carson Beck on the way. And then there's the 2022 issue there with Gunnar Stockton as well out of Raven County. I mean, if we're keeping it really, really real, Brandon, I want to know, you said something funny where you said it forced Georgia to push the Marcus Rosemy button. Was it worth Georgia losing this highly touted passer from Prince Avenue Christian in order to put another win in the ledger there in the Georgia-Florida battle here with Marcus Rosemy?
Yeah, I'm certainly happier about Rosemy as a fan than I am disappointed about Vandegrift. I'll absolutely say that. But I am also curious about one of those names you just mentioned, and we'll make him the last guy we talk about here today. That's Gunnar Stockton. Is that the guy that Georgia, you think, has identified for 2022? And is Georgia going to, if they choose to go all in on him, are they going to win that one? Because let's face it, we've watched a handful of in-state quarterbacks from Georgia go on to win a stack of national championships at Clemson, it would seem, as of late. If Georgia prioritizes Gunnar Stockton, can they actually win one of these battles for an in-state quarterback for a change?
Yeah, that's funny. First of all, Brandon, there's about 5 really good 2022 quarterbacks. I don't know if it'll be like 2018 with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields and Jaron Williams and all those guys, but I think the 2020 crop is going to be very strong. And I kind of chuckle at this because here we are wondering about when is Georgia going to go all in on a 2022 quarterback. in the 2019 high school football season they've not even handed out the pads and the hip pads yet, sir, for the full gear and the girdles, and yet we're wondering about Georgia going all in on a 2022 quarterback.
That's probably fair.
That said, there is reason to believe Georgia will have a great chance at Gunnar Stockton. I think he is a bona fide, very good prospect. He seems to check every box. There is a lot of Georgia ties in that Gunnar Stockton situation, and perhaps, Brandon, because it's getting so close to the time that Gunnar Stockton might decide, at least in your mind, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, that perhaps it's the bat signal up over the DawgNation.com webpage where I need to write about Gunnar Stockton pretty soon.
Well, Jeff, listen, that is really fun stuff, and all the way around on the quarterback stuff and the receivers and kind of everything else in between. We appreciate what was a very fun conversation for us here on DawgNation Daily today. Hope you're set up for a great weekend. I'll look forward to talking to you again soon here in our program, and as you mentioned, we'll look forward to reading a lot from you in the days ahead on the pages of DawgNation.com as well. Have a great one, Jeff.
Hey, Brandon, gotcha, buddy, and I will bone up on 2023 and 2024 quarterbacks for our next appearance.
Sounds good, Jeff. Thanks.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Fun stuff from Jeff Sentell, and he's certainly right about how long 2022 feels away. But we are in kind of an interesting age when it comes to quarterback recruiting, where I thought it was interesting to hear, Jeff say when it comes to Brock Vandegrift, hey, Oklahoma's going to go after him for 2021. They're going to secure that commitment, but they're not going to do anything for the 2020 class. They're going to be, content to let it go with Spencer Rattler as a 2019 and Vandegrift as a 2021. It wasn't that long ago that all programs were kind of trying to do what Georgia did with its 2016, 2017, 2018 class, stacking these quarterbacks. Gatorade Player of the Year in Jacob Eason. Jake Fromm, very close to a consensus 5-star. Justin Fields, almost the number 1 player in the country, at least close to that. And at one point in time, he was ranked as the number 1 player in the country. Really stockpiling that depth at the quarterback position. It seems like really no one's doing that as much anymore because of the mobility that quarterbacks have now in the age of the transfer portal. And yet, in some cases, if you don't get in early, you don't get in at all. I mean, That was the case with Sean Watson and Trevor Lawrence both. The fact that Clemson established those better relationships early hurt Georgia in both those regards. And, when Kirby Smart tries to get in at the end on Lawrence, even if you make a strong push, in some cases it's too little too late. And the story was, I think, pretty similar when it comes to Deshaun Watson as well. So 2022 feels like a long way away, but when it comes to making sure you get the best quarterback in this state, in an era in which actually the quarterback position in Georgia has gotten pretty good. I mean, the state of Georgia for high school, getting in early is sort of the only way to get in. All right, it's our SEC through here now. And there was one thing I wanted to talk about because I thought this was kind of interesting. Our buddy Bill Bender from the Sporting News, who we have on the show from time to time, and believe it or not, we're actually coming up on the end of a decade. If you count decades the way that most people do, this is or at least the way that the news media seemingly does, this is the last year of the second decade of the, is it the 21st? What century? In 21st century? Yeah, we're in the 21st century, in the second decade coming to a close here this year. And Bill Bender of the Sporting News ranks his top teams of the decade thus far. Now, if you're curious, Georgia comes in at number, I think it's 12 on this list. Let me see. They are at number 12. Yeah, right behind Notre Dame is Georgia at number 12 on this list. Now, I obviously don't know the situation with every one of these programs, but I think it's kind of interesting when you look at Georgia, how different things are in 2019 compared to 2010. Has any program changed over the course of a decade as much as seemingly Georgia has over that same time? So when it comes to how Georgia's viewed for this decade, most of the success that Georgia's had this decade, unfortunately, has been the last 2 years. 2012, apologies to that SEC East year, I guess 2011 there as well. But it's a lot of Georgia's success for a decade has been kind of compacted and sort of solidified in one small area. But nonetheless, there's something interesting to me about Georgia's ranking on this. That Georgia comes in one spot ahead of Florida at 13. Now, I know that you think I'm setting you up for more Gator hater stuff, and obviously I have a good time with that. But on this point, I'm going to be serious, and on this point, I'm actually going to give Florida a little credit. Think about how significant it would have seemed and felt back in the 90s to say that Georgia was going to have a better decade than Florida. This pains me to say. I'm not proud to say this. But given where Georgia was in the 90s and where Florida was, being better than Florida for a full decade felt sort of like kind of a hard thing to do. And even in the 2000s, where it looked like Georgia was turning the corner at the beginning of the decade, Richt wins an SEC in 2002, wins another SEC championship in 2005, and yet still, head-to-head wins against Florida were few and far between. Georgia had just one in the first half of that first decade of this millennium. And then Florida wins the 2006 national championship, wins another 2008 national championship. Being better than Florida in that decade seemed pretty hard to do. But here we are now, moving into 2019, and I feel like 2019 is going to be more of what the last couple of years have been. I feel very confident about that. We're talking about Georgia finally putting together a decade that's better than what Florida's done. Now, Florida's made it somewhat easy because they haven't been very good. But on its face, I think that's a pretty significant accomplishment. And I think it speaks to the growth and development of Georgia under Kirby Smart. It's one of those things where it's probably pretty important to notice what you have done as opposed to always fixating on what Georgia has not done as of yet. Georgia's still chasing that elusive national championship, and it's still desperate to return to the college football playoff, and I get all of that. But when you look over the last couple of years, when you look at the way this program has been built up, I think you see that Georgia's actually accomplishing something pretty significant, putting one of its rivals in the rearview mirror. That's pretty impressive. Now, I think it's also interesting, by the way, just to kind of wrap up this conversation, some of the teams that do rank ahead of Georgia, Auburn is here at number 9, and you understand why Auburn would be on the list. You get points for winning a national championship in 2010. You get points for playing for a title, I'm sure, in 2013. Auburn won the SEC that year. But I'd be curious. And maybe you can't get an Auburn fan to, be all that honest about this. Maybe they wouldn't, readily admit this. You think Auburn fans would trade what they have had for what Georgia sort of has had, given the fact of where they are right now? Now Auburn's going to say, we won a national championship. You didn't. Well, that's fine. Georgia's also dominated in head-to-head against these two programs. It would seem to have utilized its last 10 years to set itself up for more success in the future. I wonder, if an Auburn fan says, no, my last 10 years have been way more fun than your last 10 years, I'm not quite sure I take him at his word on that. Nonetheless, it's a pretty fun list. It's the Sporting News. You can check it out for yourself. We will make that your SEC through. And I want to talk briefly just for a moment here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, about Nicholas Claxton, drafted last night, number 31 overall, first pick of the second round. He goes to the Brooklyn Nets. It's another example of why I just sometimes hate these professional drafts so much, because most of the media coverage that centers around them just ends up being verifiably proven false the moment the draft happens. We'd heard about Nicholas Claxton skyrocketing up draft boards, and like a lot of things, that ends up kind of not being the case. And also, for those of us who have kind of followed this stuff in the past, there's always been sort of viewed to be this line of demarcation between the last pick in the first round, where you got that guaranteed contract that could set your family up for life, and that first pick in the second round, where at least I've been of the belief that wasn't necessarily the case. However, I was doing a little bit of research on this. I saw where Vice Sports has written about this a little bit. NBC Sports has written about this a little bit, that there are a lot more guaranteed contracts in the second round than there used to be. In fact, the majority of guys taken in that kind of those first 15 picks of the second round have actually gone on to make some guaranteed money, at least a year's worth, which might be, I think the league minimum's a little less than $1 million, like $800,000 or something like that, and potentially even more than that. So I was obviously disappointed to see Nicholas Claxton fall out of the first round last night, and yet even with the current salary structure in the NBA, he should be set up to make himself some money here, and it'll be nice to see another former Georgia player now in the NBA. Now, selfishly, I would have loved to have seen Claxton playing with Anthony Edwards and that impressive crop of freshmen that Georgia brings in. From that standpoint, you wish he could have come back to school, but I'll admit that's a selfish concern. From a financial standpoint, he actually may be set up better in the second round than I would have initially thought. I thought that was kind of worth paying attention to. Let me also, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, talk to you about our Kroger kickoff here just for a moment. And, of course, the big thing in the Georgia athletic calendar right now, that all the spring sports have kind of ended, we are looking ahead now to the start of the football season, August 31st, on that Saturday night there, 7:30 p.m. against Vanderbilt. I think it's going to be an incredible atmosphere for that game. Now, we've still got some interesting things to do before we get there. We've got SEC Media Days coming up in kind of mid-July. That'll be something worth paying attention to. We've got the opening in Frisco, Texas. That's the first week in July. So we've got some, and there'll be a lot more commits for Georgia kind of coming in between there as well. So there's plenty of football news coming, but in terms of the official calendar of on-field stuff for Georgia, I guess the next big athletic event is the season opener, and it's going to be here before you know it in Nashville. We've got some fun things planned for that. We'll be talking to you about that a whole lot more coming up. But it's our Kroger kickoff here on DawgNation Daily. And speaking of our friends at Kroger, a lot of you have travel going on this time of year. Well, Kroger's got a great new program for you. It's called the Kroger Fuel VIP program, and it allows customers to earn 2 fuel points on purchase instead of just 1. Enrollment's easy. You can scan the barcode at checkout or enroll online at Kroger.com/fuel. VIP. It's just $40 for an annual enrollment, and it's a great deal because you get 2 fuel points for every dollar spent. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up here on DawgNation Daily here today, presented by Kroger, and I guess I'll return back to where we kind of started the show today. Marcus Rosemy is obviously a really impressive wide receiver and a really fun guy to think about in the mix for the Georgia offense in the future, and yet there is also another one of these names to add to the list of head-to-head wins for Georgia against Florida in recruiting. It could not be more fun to do what a lot of us enjoy doing around here, our buddy Eddie included, and that's being a Gator hater. And speaking of being a Gator hater, how about this for you? 964 days. That is how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. It's our Gator Hater Updater right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Let me set the stage for you for the weekend. One of the things you're going to be paying attention to tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Cory Wren, the speedster from New Orleans. He'll make his decision. DawgNation will have coverage of that one way or another. Make sure you read that. We'll see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily. Have a great weekend, everybody. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, where we kind of get your thoughts on today's show or your thoughts about anything happening around UGA. And, of course, our friends at R.S. Andrews make it all possible. There's a reason why we call this the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, because, let's face it, there is nothing more uncomfortable and miserable this time of year if your house is not as cool as it needs to be. We were in Athens yesterday for some reasons that I'll tell you later on, and we went into a couple of establishments on our way home, and there wasn't just enough air conditioning, and there's nothing worse in the summertime when you got that heat beating down on you. Those beads of sweat start to kind of show up on your temple and your forehead. Not good times. And if that's in your home, it's even worse. That's why you want my friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. and they'll give you that $99 Smiley tune-up, and they'll get your air conditioning unit back to factory fresh specs. That's good news. Check that out at RS Andrews. All right, let's get some comments. There's one comment in particular that I want to mention here. Somebody says I should change my sign-off song to the Krypton theme, which is the Georgia fourth quarter deal and the thing that Georgia plays to start the games. Willie Gray Jr., I've actually thought about doing that before. At one point in time, we were going to do an extra segment on the show, and we were going to utilize that. I had basically the whole thing made and done, and then from a timing standpoint, it became one of those deals where it's kind of hard for us to do that because we have some structural stuff we have to follow. And so I've actually made something that does include that. We just have never used it before. But maybe we will do that at some point in time. I think, Willie, that's probably a pretty good idea. Willie. James Holcomb, the subject of Tennessee assistant, saying that actually maybe he's talking about those some guys when they were at Georgia, maybe. J.J. McMillan says, lower the lights to fade out and play Krypton. I wonder how our support staff would feel about that. If every single day we closed the show with a light up Sanford, where the lights went down, the cell phone lights came up. Maybe we should consider doing that. But maybe we should think about doing that. Let me see what's going over here at YouTube for a moment there as well. And as I make the transition here, hope y'all are getting ready for a great weekend. Got some fun stuff planned, I hope. Brian McPhail likes that as well. He says, ooh, the Krypton, and turn off the lights in the studio, turn on the flashlight. It kind of reminds me of this. Have y'all seen a couple of these like Instagram live things or, Instagram story stuff of some of these recruits when they go into Sanford Stadium? If I'm seeing this correctly, and I'm colorblind, so sometimes stuff doesn't look the same way to me it does other people, but it looks like those LED lights they're putting in Sanford Stadium have been installed, and it looks like they've got a pretty cool. Have you seen some of these pictures that almost looks like the stadium has like a red hue to it now, where I think they're able to kind of put that, kind of over the stadium. The Braves try to do something like this on Friday nights as well, but I think because of those new cool LED lights, I think they have a lot of things they can do, like they can kind of bring down the lights. With stadium lights in particular, it's kind of hard to do that because it takes a long time to turn them back on. I'm talking about the old school lights. But these new school LED things, you can kind of control and do whatever you want to. See if y'all can find some of these pictures. I can't think of the recruits in particular that I've seen from these, but I've seen it a couple times where it seems like when they go see Sanford Stadium on their visits, they're doing something cool with the lights that makes the entire stadium look red. Unless I'm just being completely colorblind. I think I saw that. I think it's kind of a cool thing. Marcus Rosemy's mom checked in today. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for being a part of our program. And I know a lot of our audience is really excited about seeing Marcus here at DawgNation in the very near future playing for the Georgia Bulldogs. That's great stuff. Great news yesterday. That was a lot of fun to be able to see. Memphis Dog says, get Eddie a glow-in-the-dark Gator hater sign with a Krypton song. If we could do that, and they make all kinds of glow-in-the-dark stuff, imagine if the lights came down, but Eddie's Gator hater sign just glowed in the dark. That'd be amazing. I don't think we probably have those technical achievements in our back pocket, but that would certainly be amazing. Jason Hester says, expect Milton to announce the first week of July. I sort of hope that's not the case. I think there's a chance that around that time could be the case. Y'all, I'm not going to be here on the first week of July. I'm taking vacation. And I don't care if Kendall Milton descends from the heavens to make his announcement of Georgia or whoever he picks, but assuming it's Georgia, if I try to get on Facebook Live or something like that from the beach, my wife is going to strangle me. So, Kendall, if you happen to be watching, would you mind postponing it to the second week of July? Be a huge, huge help for me. Huge help. Now, listen, I think the audience would say, if you're coming to Georgia, come when you want. But if you could think about postponing to the second week of July, that would be an awesome, awesome thing. I would really, really appreciate that. My family would certainly appreciate that. Green Soldier says, no. Earlier the better. He says, you need to take vacation when I'm on vacation. Certainly, Green, that's a very good idea indeed. Of course, you're also working a whole lot harder than I am. Tram Dickerson says, BA live from his vacation. Yeah, listen, at the vacation, there's a lot of beach and pool stuff going on, a lot of sunscreen, trust me, the way I look at the beach is not going to win me any kind of viewers. I can promise you that. Brian McPhail says, I'm also on vacation that July 4th week. And really, it is about the best week to be gone, typically. You try to plan you try to plan things around, that time. And part of the reason why I picked that week is I'm pretty sure it's a dead period in terms of contact. And that doesn't keep that doesn't keep anybody from committing. But part of the reason why I picked it was because it was a dead period. And it's also 2 weeks before SEC media days and some of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, on paper, it kind of looks like about the best time to go, but that doesn't stop somebody from committing. Chip Gromlich says that Milton needs to announce when Jeff Sintel's on vacation. Yeah, for sure. Now, let me get this comment right here, too, from Alan Verbanchik, who says, BA. Would you skip the vacation for a national championship? Now here's the thing. I am strategic with my vacations. I like to go on vacation during the dead of summer. I don't even go on vacation. Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I don't even go on vacation on my kids' spring break, which is the first week in April, because it's still the middle of spring practice. So I'm pretty strategic when I take my time off. And obviously from the beginning of August through really February National Signing Day, because if you'll notice, once again, not to toot my own horn, but I didn't take any vacation time last year until well after the February signing day had occurred. So from that, that stretch of time from early signing period in December until the end when it came February, we were rocking and rolling here every single day because I was beating that drum for George Pickens every single day. So we're pretty strategic when we take our time off around here. What else is going on in the Facebook comment section? Santiago Dion asks a good question. He says, BA, did we recruit enough cornerbacks the last 2 years who can cover the talented wide receivers of Bama and Clemson? Remember, Jeff and you discussed this a month ago. Santiago, I believe that, yes, Georgia has done a really good job with its cornerback recruitment. And it's one of the reasons why, to Jeff's credit, even though I make a big deal about the running backs all the time, if you've watched Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, and Santiago, I know you have, Jeff has had Keely Ringo ranked as the number one top target on our top targets list for weeks now. And the reason why Jeff has Ringo there, he said it before, is because of this crop of Alabama and Clemson wide receivers and the fact that that's what the elite teams seem to have right now, Oklahoma included in that. Oklahoma's had a big crop of wide receivers, and that's not changing anytime soon. These teams that you probably might have to beat in the playoff, you're going to have to go head-to-head with your defensive backs. And so between Campbell, who we'll find out more about, Tyreek Stevenson, DJ Daniel, both of which I really like, Ringo, who you could have for the class of 2020, Georgia is really identifying some high-quality defensive backs, and it's winning with these guys. And the other thing about Georgia, and I don't think this is a coincidence. Somehow, some way, I don't think this is a coincidence. If you look at the player development aspect of this, Georgia can tout player development at the defensive back position, I got to imagine, as much as any program in the world could ever. DeAndre Baker, 3-star, Thorpe Award winner. Eric Stokes, 3-star. Lockdown cornerback by almost anybody's estimation going into the 2019 season. So not only has Georgia recruited well at that position, I think that Georgia can really tout player development on that as well. And, by the way, if I had more time, I probably would have mentioned this in the show today. I saw where Pro Football Focus, their college Twitter account, was back to touting Richard LeCounte again, showing some different numbers for him. And sometimes people will say, well, what those numbers seem to show doesn't match what my eyes have seen necessarily. I'm going to caution you to be too quick to assume that Richard LeCounte's not a big part of the solution for the Georgia secondary here this year as well. We already know that J.R. Reed is just pencil him in. He's rock solid as can be. I have high expectations for Richard LeCounte. It's really kind of interesting to see. Every time Pro Football Focus, mentions LeCounte, they always seem to mention him in glowing terms, showing off some pretty good stats of what he's been able to do in terms of maybe better tackling than some people might think, and certainly better pass coverage that he probably gets credit for. So I think this Georgia secondary, safeties and corners, is probably set up pretty well here. Gene King, how about this? This is kind of a loaded comment. He says, BA, what other running back would you like to see Georgia go out and get, given the fact that Kendall Milton's a silent commit? I think that's actually pretty funny. So if we assume for a moment that Georgia could get good news with Kendall Milton, and maybe I won't go quite as far as you just did there with the idea of him being a silent commit, but you certainly get the sense that maybe the visit went well this past weekend. I won't deny that. I think that Jeff's discussion of Chaney is interesting. I think that Tank Bigsby's really interesting. Do I think that Georgia could still go head-to-head and win for Zack Evans? I think it possibly could. And obviously that'd be my first choice there. But, as I said when Jeff was on this for the regular show, the fact that Evans didn't include Texas and Texas A&M is almost more of a sign that they're in it than had they been like two of those five. I think this is an example of, and I said this before, it's like the old country song lyric, if the phone doesn't ring, you know it was me. And I think that's that version of that in recruiting. I want to feel a certain way about the way I'm getting recruited by Texas and Texas A&M. Therefore, I'm not going to include them among my top five because I know they're not going to give up. They're going to keep pursuing, and maybe they'll sing the song I want them to sing. Maybe they'll do the dance I want them to do, and maybe now that's what Texas is doing when it comes to Zack Evans. Some guys want to feel a certain kind of love, a certain kind of way, and maybe that's what's going to happen here. So if you, just for the sake of conversation, assume that Georgia loses out on that, is it still a possibility that Georgia could flip Marshawn Lloyd from South Carolina? I don't see why it wouldn't be. South Carolina has had no success running the ball whatsoever. None. They've been awful running the football. They don't have a bad defensive line, but from an offensive line standpoint, running the football standpoint, they're not great. And my understanding is they want to keep the up-tempo offense going. They want to keep trying to push that, which I would think runs counter to really developing an effective running game. So it could be him. It could be Bigsby. Jeff keeps pushing the idea of Chaney. Between the three, I guess I don't know. I was happy to hear Jeff report that Bigsby was back on campus because I at least like keeping that relationship open. I at least like keeping that open. And is he a better back than Marshawn Lloyd? I'd let somebody tell me that. I'm not going to try to decide that for myself. I'd let somebody tell me that. Justin Dowell says, why is the studio background Gator blue? The blue is to match the Krog. I don't feel like that's a Gator blue. This can be a lot of different colors. I do kind of feel like, unfortunately, for whatever reason, in terms of how it shows on camera, the blue looks the best. The red, as y'all always say, it looks like pink or something like that. It's hard to get red to show up as red, but the blue at least kind of shows up and looks blue. And if we didn't have Kroger in that screen, I'd have to go home. So I'm very, very thankful to very thankful to have them. John Collins says, any news on how Milton's visit to Bama went? Yeah, that's right. That was a midweek visit. Have you heard anything about that? I haven't heard anything about it. It's kind of like the LSU visit where, you heard a ton about the Ohio State visit. You never heard much about the LSU visit. You heard a ton about the Georgia visit. So I forgot. The Milton thing was midweek. I guess I should have asked Jeff about that. To be completely honest, I just forgot. And I hate that. Matt Rukavina has a good comment. He says, Milton and Evans, that's a dream team. Milton and Bigsby, that's pretty darn close. And you may be very well right about that because, you have to look no further, and I know this is kind of a tired discussion now, but look no further than Todd Gurley. Not only is Gurley one of the best running backs ever at Georgia, he's one of the best running backs, period. He's phenomenal, and, he would not have been your, in some cases, some people's first choice back when he signed with Georgia alongside Keith Marshall. So that's a very fair point from Matt on that. Let me go back over to YouTube here just for a moment. Brian McPhail says, if you don't hear anything about the Milton visit, it's probably a good thing. And yeah, in the case of the LSU visit, that's the way that I took that, Brian, for sure. BTW says Milton isn't going to Alabama. Yeah, I've never really felt the Alabama thing for him either, VT, but a lot of that kind of stuff is just my assumption. I'm free with my opinions, and I think most of y'all kind of know that's what those things are. G. Grace, who's an Alabama fan, on the subject of his Alabama Crimson Tide for a moment, says that coaching failed us last year. We had great recruiters, but awful in-game coaching. And one way or another, that was a part of the changeover that Alabama seemingly wanted to make this year, was to bring in more on-field type coaching stuff. I'm sure G. Grace would disagree with this, but I kind of took that to mean this was Alabama kind of loading up, stocking up in kind of a win-now mode type thing. We'll see how that plays out, because my assumption is that right now Nick Saban's operating on a short timeline. I think the Damian George thing kind of feels like that. Alabama taking a 3-star offensive lineman would not have happened in the past, but knowing how badly it needs that next elite back, you kind of do what you need to do if you feel like you're not going to be here another 5 or 10 years. And so, like I said, I know that's not what Grace is going to agree with, and I respect his opinion. But that's kind of what that's kind of where I see that going. Before I get Connor Riley, let me read Cliff Payne, who says the UGA defense got gassed last year. The offense decided to try and run the clock out. Guess what? That doesn't work against elite teams. Hopefully Kirby has learned his lesson now. I think that's an interesting point, and I will say that somebody's opinion that I greatly respect told me on the sideline of the SEC championship that he thought the Georgia defense looked gassed as well. So, did that happen? Was there I don't know if it's a fatigue or conditioning issue there late. I'm not sure, but that idea of them being gassed, someone whose opinion I greatly respect did say that. So we'll see if more talent, more rotation, more ability to stop the run. We'll see if those things prevent that from happening in 2019, because some would say that may have been an issue when at the end of last season Connor Riley does join us.
I think at the end of last season it was a talent issue, specifically when DeAndre Walker left that game. They just did not have a pass rusher or specifically an outside linebacker good enough to not even so much pressure the quarterback, but keep Jalen Hurts in the pocket and force him to beat you from there. Because as well as Jalen Hurts played there, a lot of the reason he had success, it wasn't because he was standing there dropping straight back and throwing dimes. It was more he was extending plays with his feet, and as a cornerback, it's really hard to cover guys regardless of how good they are, and especially when they're as good as Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Waddle are for 8-9 seconds. And I think that's one area where Georgia certainly has the potential to be a lot better. But early on, I'd really like to see, the outside linebackers play as well as Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy did in 2017.
Along those lines, in YouTube, Light Dog says, 1968, I still don't understand how Hurts can come in. We have no answer for him. I really don't get it. But Light Dog, as Connor said, and I know this sounds like excuse-making if you're not a Georgia fan, but Hurts' presence in the game coincided with DeAndre Walker's absence. I believe that Walker got hurt on the same play that
3 plays before.
Yeah, Tua Tagovailoa did, right around that same time anyway. And I do think that made a big difference. We talked about this with Pete Futag yesterday from College Football News, that I do think, everybody looks at Georgia's recruiting, and it seems like if you kind of follow this from afar, Georgia just gets every player it wants, and therefore people then assume, well, talent's not the issue for Georgia. Against Alabama, it still is, because Alabama has recruited, to its credit, in some years as good, in most years just a little bit better. I mean, they're still, statistically speaking, going to have a measurable talent advantage this year. Clemson's recruiting classes are typically ranked lower than Georgia's this year, probably not, but typically ranked lower. But in terms of individual spots in the field, you see an elite player, an elite recruit in almost every spot that matters for Clemson. So talent is still an issue when you go up and face a team like that. Against virtually everybody else, Georgia can use its talent advantage to win the game, and in most cases, as we've been talking about, they're going to win them easily. But against Alabama, it is still about, do you have enough talent to go out and get it done? Can you stop the run with a limited number of personnel and keep, would-be, back 7 guys back in pass coverage to sort of make those passing lanes smaller? Can you do those kinds of things against Alabama, against the Crimson Tide, because they've been number one in recruiting so much? It is still about recruiting at such a level that you have the same talent they do, if not a little bit more.
Right. Georgia, yes, as much as we just talked about the outside linebacker position when DeAndre Walker went out, Brendan Cox is a 5-star. He was filling in for DeAndre Walker. Adam Anderson was a 5-star. He was out there on the field for that play. And I think for whatever reason, those guys were not fully ready for that moment, which is, something a lot of these guys probably think they are coming in, given just the 5-star status that they have.
But this goes back to something we said about Nolan Smith, that if Smith and Dean are as good this year as some people have suggested they could be, it actually makes them, I think, pretty unusual for freshmen. The way that Brenton Cox and Adam Anderson played last year.
They played like freshmen.
Yeah, I mean, to me, they played like a typical freshman would play. I think you can look at some moments and say, well, Adam Anderson looks pretty good right there. Brenton Cox was on the field a lot. I'm assuming he must have had, some moments like that as well. But in this big game, you can point to Brenton Cox and said, ooh, you'd like to have gotten some more from him on that. To me, that's a typical freshman. But if Nolan Smith were to leapfrog ahead of those guys and be on the field this year, if Nakobe Dean were to leapfrog ahead of a guy like Channing Tindall, who pretty clearly had some good moments on the field a year ago, that to me is atypical freshman behavior. And it's never been harder to play at Georgia than it is right now. If freshmen are playing this year, it actually means that this may be truly a unique crop of freshmen.
Mm-hmm.
What else is going on? Adam Phillips says, what happens with the roster management with the Jaden Hunter transfer?
Georgia's right at 85.
Yeah, I was going to say they should be in pretty good shape one way or another on that. Should be in pretty good shape right at 85. I mean, is there still a roster move to be coming at some point in time because of somebody's decision? I mean, it certainly would not surprise me. I mean, we live in kind of an era in which I think these doors are going to kind of swing both ways here for quite some time. But and by the way, Sonia Prescott also mentioned on that stuff, don't count out Jermaine Johnson. No, Sonia, I'm not counting out Jermaine Johnson at all. In that particular discussion, I was only talking about freshmen. He's a junior college transfer. But my guess is Jermaine Johnson takes the first snap of the season for Georgia. And on every pivotal snap, my guess is, barring injury, Jermaine Johnson's probably going to be on the field.
Actually, I'm going to say Azeez Ojulari will be that first snap instead of Johnson.
Well, couldn't they both be on the field?
Theoretically, yeah.
Because Gerald Harmon also mentions Ojulari as well.
No, that means Nolan Smith's not on the field. I think, I think we'd both probably like to see Nolan Smith on the field.
Oh, I'd love to see it, but I'm definitely more confident in the older guys, Ojulari and Johnson. First snap of the year. I mean, it almost seems like a symbolic thing of you want to make Nolan earn something, right?
So, yes, Johnson is technically an older guy, but he's been at Georgia for, I think, just as long as Nolan had.
Yeah.
Age is only a number, B.A.
C.J. Oran says, I don't care what anybody says, Kendall Milton's coming to Georgia. Yeah, I feel pretty strong about that one at the moment.
What about what Kendall Milton says? Do you care what he has to say?
Honestly, it may be one of those things where if Milton came out and said, hey, I'm going to blah, 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 I think a lot of Georgia fans would be like, he's pulling our leg. He's going to be here come December. I think a lot of Georgia fans might say that. Dimitri Sullivan says, B.A., if James Cook, this is on YouTube, if James Cook finishes the year with 1,200 all-purpose yards, would you give him the credit he deserves? See, I got hammered on Twitter for this the other day. I almost never get a negative Twitter message. I wonder if I could find this. I almost never.
They had people coming to me saying, Connor, you got to keep BA in check on James Cook.
What did I say?
I think you were kind of poo-pooing him and this idea that, he can't be the third running back for Georgia this year or something along those lines.
This is what frustrates me. And people are allowed to feel the way they want to feel. But I feel greatly confident that Brian Herrien, Zamir White, and DeAndre Swift, barring injury, are Georgia's top three running backs. That is a far leap to then get to that I don't like James Cook or somehow be criticizing James Cook. I just think that's a far, far cry. And Dimitri here, somebody just ripped me on Twitter about this. And like I said, I almost never get negative criticism about really anything because I'm a nice guy. I got blasted for some of my James Cook takes the other day, and I swear to you, I don't even remember what they were. I think that
they weren't good takes.
I get that. Apparently so. I mean, I'm the one, if you want to go back and listen to the totality of what I've said in the offseason, I'm the one who's challenging Georgia to use James Cook. Remember that guy that I think he ended up signing Auburn? What was his name?
Mark Anthony Richards?
Yes, Mark Anthony Richards. And, Jeff interviewed him. This is before he signed with Auburn, because he did go to Auburn, right? Before he signed with Auburn, Mark Anthony Richards was like, Georgia's telling me I'm going to come in here and be like the freak, and I'm going to, catch a few balls and get a few snaps and do a few jet sweeps. On this show, you can hear me saying, that's what I want to see them do with James Cook. I've been touting for an opportunity for James Cook, utilize James Cook. I didn't want to see, no disrespect to Mar, I didn't want to see him come in here and take away the opportunity that I thought belonged to James Cook. I feel like I vouched for Cook, but it is my earnest opinion that Brian Herrien's ahead of him on the depth chart, and that's not to me I don't feel like that's disrespectful. I mean, like, be serious. That's not disrespectful, is it?
No. I mean, James Holcomb says, B.A., just come out and admit it. You just hate James Cook.
Y'all don't
just
do
hate
this.
Him. Can't stand him.
Y'all don't do this. I feel like my opinion stands on its own. Dennis Wilson says Mark Anthony Richards should have come to Miami. Green Soldier says that Cook's an open field jet sweep kind of guy, and BA has been fighting to see it. Yes, thank you. That's a man who speaks with integrity. Green Soldier does. Very well said for sure. Tram Dickerson says he thinks James Cook could be Alvin Kamara. It is kind of ironic. Kamara's another guy that just didn't get used properly in college. I hope that and hear me when I'm saying this, I hope that James Cook's not the next Alvin Kamara, because it's going to be a guy that Tennessee fans say when they see him running all over the place, the New Orleans Saints, they say, why didn't we use him when we had him? So I hope that even if he shows that skill set, I just hope that Georgia has enough sense to know how to use it, because clearly at Tennessee they did not use Kamara as well as they probably could have. Lane Johnson says that Cook's more dynamic than Harrion. I think there's more to the running back position than dynamism. Is that a word? Dynamism?
No, almost certainly not.
Oh, look it up. Dynamism. I think dynamism is a word.
I think that sounds like an old Chinese religion.
I think dynamism is a word. Hold on. Yeah. The quality of being characterized by vigorous activity and progress. Dynamism.
That doesn't seem like a word.
I'll accept your apology in the mail. I think there's more to the running back position than just being dynamic, and I don't want to discredit Harrion's ability to be pretty dynamic there also. Now, if you want to, I still think there's a great role for James Cook or whatever. I'm not going to get banged into a corner on this. But, Harrion's been waiting his turn, and he is a senior. And we saw how this played out with Elijah Holyfield a year ago. I think that you discount him at your own peril.
I have a different running back question.
Okay.
So
hopefully this doesn't get me dragged the way the last one did.
No. I don't think it will. It shouldn't, unless you're just really off the handlebars here. So I think it's safe to say this offseason, DeAndre Baker has gotten a lot of guff from Georgia fans for his decision to sit out the Sugar Bowl.
Not for me personally.
Not for me. I'm just saying
yeah.
The average Georgia fan, I think, did not like what he did and how he went about his business in the Sugar Bowl. I'm interested in what Georgia fans think about DeAndre Swift, in the sense that there is already this accepted idea that he is gone after this year. And Kendall Milton, as you played the audio on our various platforms yesterday and Wednesday, came out and said Georgia has told them that he is gone and that he is already looking at the NFL after this season. Most assume it's a foregone conclusion, but at the same point in time, I think for him to have sort of been this open, for Georgia to have been this sort of open with it, letting people know, like, hey, the focus on he's going to come out and say he's absolutely focused on Georgia this year, doing everything for Georgia this year. But there's also this, like, hey, like, he's gone after this year. Like, we know he's moving on to the NFL. And I do wonder sort of what the juxtaposition is for that.
So I'll say two things in response to this. I won't pretend to speak for all Georgia fans, but I'll say two things. Part of this is, and I think that Kendall Milton's a smart guy, and I think his family, they do incredible due diligence on their recruitment. But I think sometimes Del McGee and other coaches say DeAndre Swift could leave at the end of this season, and I think recruits here, he's definitely leaving, because there are a lot of examples of this where recruits say, and so-and-so's gone for sure at the end of the year. DeAndre Swift probably is going to leave. I don't believe the Georgia coaching staff told Kendall Milton that DeAndre Swift is definitely leaving at the end of the season. I don't believe that's the case. I think they said when you look at just the way things could go, it's likely that he might. And I think that sometimes recruits hear that as, well, that means that he definitely is. So there's that on the one hand, that sometimes recruits hear what they want to hear when it comes to that. I also think there's just a belief that the running back position is just different. I haven't heard other positions spoken about in such limited terms the way that you hear about running back. You've only got so many carries. You've only got so much opportunity. All positions in the NFL are certainly short term, but it seems like running back more so than others. And so from that standpoint, if DeAndre Swift says, I got to go to the NFL and get mine while I can, even if it's not as a first-round pick, I do think most Georgia fans would be sort of the mind of, yeah, that probably makes sense, because I think we all know that, once you get used up as a running back, you've got nothing left more to give. And these NFL teams are the worst about this. They are the worst about this.
You look at Todd Gurley, like, thank God he got paid and he still has a good chunk of guaranteed money left on his deal. Otherwise, the Rams, like, if he were, coming up at the end of his rookie deal, the Rams would obviously have a lot more hesitation on sort of giving him that long-term contract. But because he got to the NFL a year earlier than he was, if he wasn't a 4-year player, that's certainly something that should weigh on his mind.
Here's the thing that I believe, and I know that a lot of our audience won't agree with me on this, but it's a philosophy that I adhere to, that who you bring into your program is more important than who goes out. When it comes to juniors, I know this sounds weird, but I kind of hope they all leave. I kind of hope they all play well enough that they move on the NFL, because that makes it easier for me to bring in. I'm putting myself in the position of Kirby Smart for a moment. If I were Kirby Smart, that makes it easier for me to bring in the next DeAndre Swift and the next Jake Fromm and the next, whomever. What you don't want is this log jam of, well, I can't go there and play because they've got a guy that's about to be a junior who's definitely staying for a senior year. It's not going to be until the next millennium until I'm on the field there at that program. You can't recruit under those under that situation. You want to be a program where a guy comes in and learns, develops in year 2, dominates in year 3, and gets his name called by Goodell in year 4, or the spring after his 3rd year. I think that's what you really want to be. That doesn't mean that I wish Andrew Thomas at the door, or I wish DeAndre Swift at the door, or I wish any of these 2017 signees at the door. I'm not telling you that, but I am telling you, when you have a pipeline that moves quickly, it keeps that recruiting funnel moving quickly there as well, and that's ultimately the key to success.
Right, and, Swift in an interview that came out this week said he was under the influence that when he was coming to Georgia that Chubb and Michelle were both going to leave after their junior seasons.
Yeah.
And they ended up not, and he said that them staying was the best thing that happened to him in his time at Georgia because it allowed him to sort of, come in on his own terms and not have this giant expectation of, all right, I have to be the guy in year 1 carrying this massive load. Because as good as he, was last season and he was in flashes in 2017, Georgia almost certainly doesn't win the SEC if he's carrying the load, and I wonder how good that Georgia offense is with him as like the guy in the backfield.
Scott Harris says, I disagree, BA. Teams win championships relative to the seniors they have. Let's spend a minute on that for a second because it's an interesting point. Last year at Clemson, pretty clearly those veteran defensive linemen played a big impact there, much the same way that Chubb and Michelle surprised folks when they came back in 2017. That group probably surprised when they came back for the 2018 season. And yet at the same time, you're still talking about freshman receiver Justin Ross. You're still talking about freshman quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. You're talking about, relatively sophomore Travis Etienne. You're talking about, relatively young crop of players around those veteran defensive linemen that made that happen. And, Clemson was still pretty deep when it comes to pass rushers, even behind those guys. But it's certainly a fair point. When you look at Alabama in 2017, the national championship game itself, Alex Leatherwood played a big role in that game. Najee Harris played a big role in that game. Obviously, everybody remembers the role that Tua Tagovailoa played in that game. Dylan Moses, I think, took some snaps in a key situation.
I think he was hurt. He would have, but then he got hurt in the SEC championship.
Okay, I thought Moses was playing because somebody else was hurt. But
there are a lot of people hurt for that Alabama
honestly,
team.
it's like 50,
they have so many injuries.
That game feels 50 years ago now.
Yeah.
But so, Scott, you make an interesting point, and I guess Connor, I'll give you a chance to respond. Do you think seniors are an important component of national championship team?
I think the right seniors are. To your point, I don't know if you need a senior running back to sort of help you win a national championship. I don't even know so much if you need a senior quarterback to help you do that. But I do think having certain seniors in the right spots, I think really does help. Sort of like a senior inside linebacker. Alabama, for as good as their linebackers have been, a lot of them ended up staying 4 years. You think of guys like C.J. Mosley. I believe Rashawn Evans was a 4-year player. You bring up the defensive line. Christian Wilkins, Ceylon Farrell, both 4-year guys. I think in the secondary, I think Georgia this year, having a senior like J.R. Reed who's been through a lot, that's really going to help Georgia, especially just in terms of having sort of an adult in the room that can really help settle them down there. I think on the offensive line last year, having Lamont Gaillard was really beneficial. And I think, this year on offense, they're not seniors in terms of age, but they're seniors certainly in terms of playing time. Guys like Jake Fromm and Charlie Warner, guys who have sort of been through the wars. I think senior might get misconstrued for more as having guys who have a ton of experience.
Green Soldier says, Connor's reading my mind. The senior leadership in key roles is pivotal, but I do want change over to bring in new talent. It's a balance, and that's probably well said, and it's fair to point out, as Scott also mentioned on Facebook a moment ago, that Georgia no way would have made the college football playoff in 2017 without its seniors, the guys on defense, the guys on offense. Because don't forget, a lot of those defensive backs could have moved on as well, and they may not have necessarily found a home in the NFL, but they could have just moved on to something else. I mean, it was not always a given that Aaron Davis and Dominic Sanders would come back that year either. So they kind of came back, gave Georgia a bit of a veteran presence there. Georgia wouldn't have made the college football playoff in 2017 without them. I'll also say, though, prior to that, Georgia wasn't recruiting at nearly the same level that it is now. So seniors were more important than 2017 than they probably ever will be for Georgia. Again, I do think it's an interesting debate. Let me go back to the James Cook thing for 1 second, at the risk of just getting absolutely annihilated. So what somebody told me on Twitter was that I need to go back and look at the stats again when it comes to Cook and Harry, and maybe I might say a different thing. And so the stats, the one that Cook really has over Harrion is he did average more yards per carry. He averaged, according to CFBstats.com, which is the best stats website. Sports Reference and CFB Stats are the two best college football stats websites. He did average 6.93 yards per carry, almost 7 full yards a carry, compared to 5.9 for Harrion, almost 6 yards a carry. Harrion did have 1 extra touchdown, had a couple extra yards on 9 more carries, but the yards per carry do benefit James Cook here. What does that do for you, Connor, to hear that that he was about a full yard per carry better than Harrion last year? What does that do for you for Cook?
I have been someone who has not been as high on Harrion as most Georgia fans. I think he's a fine, capable running back, but I think for Georgia to reach its goals this year, I believe that it needs Zamir White to at least show enough flashes of the guy, the Prince who was promised, type of running back, and sort of emerge as, the quote-unquote thunder and lightning, and I don't know if Brian Harrion can sort of bring that same thunder.
So let's say that Zamir is the number 2 back. Let's say that Zamir and DeAndre Swift are Chubb and Michelle just for right now.
Yep.
There's still going to be a
White lightning.
Yeah. Ooh, that's not bad. Did you do that on your own?
Of course I did.
That's not bad. Now, Matthew Bowling may come for some
Matthew Bowling does not want that nickname,
so
I will do everything in my power to foist that nickname onto somebody else.
Can we make White Lightning happen? That's actually not bad. But let's say for a moment they are the new Chubb and Michelle. There's still going to be a number of carries left over for that number 3 running back. And I would tell you that I believe it's going to be Harrion. But at least a portion of our audience would say, based on, I'm assuming this yards per carry number from a year ago, that no, it's actually going to be Cook ahead of Harrion. Which, do you think that number suggests that Cook is better than Brian Harrion, or could be better than Brian Harrion?
No, I don't. I think the thing to consider too, like, yes, you would love it if Cook is reeling off big runs all the time, but DeAndre Swift sort of fills that void, that sort of same archetype for you, whereas like Harrion, it might not be sexy to get 4 yards in every carry, but I think there is a function of having someone like that. I think that's why Elijah Holyfield had as good a year last year as he did, and he sort of opened things up for DeAndre Swift later in the year just because he was going to, soften up the defense by going 4 yards a carry at 4 yards a carry at 4 yards a carry at a time. And I think if Harry can fill that role and just be that guy who gets you 4 to 5 yards a carry every time, doesn't have a lot of negative plays, which Cook's, running tendency and play style probably alleviates more of that.
Yeah.
I think if Harrion's a guy who you can give him the ball and he will get you 3 to 4 yards, he'll take you from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 6 or 2nd and 7 to 3rd and 3. If he can be that guy, that fills a big role for Georgia.
So it's kind of interesting. We look at the game log for James Cook. He did have 11 carries against South Carolina. That was almost all late in the game. He had one really big long run against UMass that kind of improves his yards per carry on the season because he had 3 rushing attempts for 76 yards that day. He also had a 23-yard catch there as well. Other nice games for him. He played more against, like, say, Vanderbilt than I would have guessed. 7 carries, 56 yards. That's an 8-yard average per carry. So the honest truth is he actually ended up playing a little bit more than I probably would have said.
He didn't play a whole lot at the end of the year, and granted, he didn't play at all in the Sugar Bowl because he had a foot injury.
But he had 7 attempts against Georgia Tech. 7 carries for 39 yards against Georgia Tech. Didn't play in the SEC no carries in the SEC championship. Injured for the Sugar Bowl. So he had 7 against Georgia Tech, 3 against UMass, only 1 carry against Florida, 7 against Vanderbilt, 1 carry against Tennessee, no totes against Missouri, 5 against Middle Tennessee State. Almost all of this certainly was late in the game. Maybe y'all will remind me. I mean, I just don't remember James Cook being used a ton, in the first 3 quarters of games this past year, maybe other than the UMass game. But maybe people have a point. Maybe Cook was playing more and doing more than I realized. I know during spring practice, we've said before, according to Kirby Smart, he was hurt. He was dealing with an ankle injury. He was not 100% healthy. But I remember personally going into that spring practice really kind of thinking, and I think Connor would agree, I think a lot of people would agree, I don't really know what Georgia has in James Cook. It sounds like some of our audience, though, feels like that Georgia, they know more about what Georgia has with Cook than maybe I initially thought.
I mean, One, Brian Herrien did have a very good spring, especially in the G-Day
Yeah.
game. He did show off some of that dynamic ability.
Dynamism is the word you're looking for.
Dynamism, however you pronounce
Dynamism
it.
is the word you're looking for.
I don't know if it's a real word. He did play well. He had a nice receiving touchdown that day, and I believe he ran over J.R. Reed. But even if you go back and look at last year, if you look at just the regular season numbers, those first 12 games, James Cook actually had more rushing yards than Brian Herrien did.
Say that one more time.
If you look at just the regular season, those first 12 games for Georgia last year, James Cook actually had more rushing yards than Brian Herrien.
Are you saying that Herrien used the Sugar Bowl to overtake him? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. He had 17 yards in the Sugar Bowl, and he finished the season with 11 more yards.
Yeah. So I still feel confident in saying that I'm a believer in Herrien, and maybe that is overly clouded because of the fact that Herrien was maybe Georgia's only fully healthy running back during the spring. That may cloud my judgment when it comes to Herrien. You may be right about that. Maybe Cook played and did more last year than I've given him credit
for. However, Herrien has this for him. I fully believe that staying healthy and being available is an actual skill. Injuries are not luck. I think with a lot of these guys, I think it's how they sort of take care of their bodies. Herrien has always been available, and coaches like to say availability is the best availability. And I actually think that, Cook, he was injured during spring. He had the foot injury at the end of last season, which kept him out of the Sugar Bowl. I think that just having Herrien always be available is something that makes him a lot more attractive than say Cook, who has battled. It's safe to say to this point has battled injuries of sorts.
Keith Finney. I don't like turning things into pitting Georgia players against each other, but Keith Finney makes a comparison between these two guys when they were freshmen. Brian Herrien in 2016 as a freshman was a pretty good back, although he didn't get to play a ton. He was, that's kind of an interesting comparison, comparing Herrien as a freshman to what Cook was as a freshman last year. Let's see those freshman numbers for Herrien. He played 11 games. He had 63 attempts, 363 yards, 5.8 yards per carry. So that's a little lower than what Cook was at last year. Had 3 touchdowns. He also had 2 catches. So
I've got his game logs pulled up. His numbers drop off significantly after the South Carolina game that year. And that would lead me to believe that around that same time, that is when Nick Chubb got fully healthy and fully cleared and ready to go, along with Sony Michel as well. And
he just didn't play it. He just didn't really play it.
After that, I mean, his game log. So after the South Carolina game, it carries per game: 2 against Vanderbilt, 2 against Florida, 1 against Kentucky, 2 against Auburn, and 4 against Louisiana Lafayette.
Yeah, so he had more yards in his freshman season than Cook had, although Cook had a higher yards per carry deal. Cook had 2 rushing touchdowns, and Herrien had 3. Yeah. So I mean, listen, I think Georgia's lucky to have them both, and I think that will be very interesting to see how that plays out here this season. Does anybody else in the comment section have anything else they want to say before we get ready to go? Danny Blackman says, how many red shirts can you have on your roster? I reckon you can redshirt as many guys as you want, I guess. Now, Georgia's just not going to do it that much because at Georgia, if you're good enough to play, you're going to play in all 12 games. And if you're not, or if you're not ready to play for whatever reason, then you're just not going to play much at all. Like these middle-tier programs, I could see Georgia Tech, I could see Vanderbilt. Teams like that are going to really, over the course of the next few years, use that 4-game redshirt rule to their advantage. Do y'all remember when Jim Grobe took Wake Forest to like a major bowl like 10 years or so ago?
Yep.
I want to say that entire roster was fifth-year seniors. Like the entire roster. It was like 25-year-old dudes. So a lot of these middle-tier programs will use the redshirt rule. For a team like Georgia and the teams that recruit at the same level Georgia does, it's just not really a rule they're going to use all that much.
I have a question for you.
Please.
So you were talking about your vacation earlier. I will also be off that week.
Is that right?
Yes, I will be in New York that week on a nice beach.
Excuse me.
Kind
of going to the Hamptons.
What has to happen for you to get on Facebook Live?
Don't do this. I'm telling you,
during vacation.
My family.
For example, last year on 4th of July, some of you might remember, it came out that Jake Fromm broke his non-throwing hand in a wakeboarding incident. I don't believe you would have gotten on Facebook Live that day if you were on vacation.
I don't think so.
What has to happen? If Kendall Milton does commit, are you going on Facebook Live that day?
Is it okay if I don't?
Yeah, it's your life. It's your vacation.
It depends on what my cell phone battery.
So almost assuredly not, because you never have any cell phone battery.
So I mean, here's what's likely to happen. If Milton commits, let's say he commits at noon, I probably won't find out about it at like 7 p.m. That's the problem. It's like I'm not, everybody else be running around crazy. I just won't hear about it because I'm not glued to my phone like some people are glued to their phones.
BA is not ready. I'll be ready to go on Facebook Live. Don't you worry, guys. And YouTube. I'll figure out a way to get us up on YouTube and have some YouTube comments for the YouTube dogs.
All right. So Robert Barnes says family comes first, and for me, it definitely does. Barry Watkins says happy wife, happy life. Don't do it, BA. Here's the thing: if Milton commits, I really hope he doesn't. But that week, if he commits, but there's a chance that the Milton family's watching right now. If y'all could just do me this one favor, let me have my family vacation for 1 week. But if he does commit, I'll probably hop on. But if it's not a 5-star running back, I'm going to have to let y'all have it for a week.
No 4-star recruits.
I'm going to have to let y'all have it. For that 1 week, if it's not Milton, I'm going to have to let y'all have it for a week, I'm afraid.
So the follow-up, is Milton the only recruit you would get on for? Would you get on for maybe Keely Ringo?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, Ringo, Milton, probably so. Mike Anderson says stop, BA. Matt Rugavina says Matt Rugavina travels more than anybody I've ever known. Like, seriously.
Where in the world is Matt Rugavina?
He's going to be in Corpus Christi, Texas that week. He must just have, you're talking about the jet set lifestyle. Matt Rugavina says just find a beach bar and do it for 10 minutes. Yeah, listen, I mean, plus, we don't have a great history of like me doing like Facebook from my phone. I don't think we've ever finished a video. Like I think we've had some good comments on these. I don't think we've ever actually finished one.
Yeah.
Ray Brandon says, "What about Zack Evans?"
Zack Evans, he'll absolutely do it for. I think Ringo, Milton, and Evans are the 3 guys you will do it.
Yeah, if it's a 5-star, I'm going to do it. Now, listen, for any of you prospective 4-stars out there, we'd be glad to have you as a part of the 2020 Georgia class. I'm probably going to wait and talk about you that following Monday, though. Great start to the new week on DawgNation Daily, though. Don't forget about that.
He'll be ready, fired up, ready to go.
Yeah, listen, we'll be coming out tanned, rested, and ready, coming out of a cannon on that. Dina Williams Pruitt. Thank you, Dina, says, y'all stop trying to get BA in trouble. Thank you very much. I appreciate somebody finally having my back here on this. GB2 says, can Maria Taylor run the show while y'all on vacation? Did see Maria last night doing the NBA draft thing.
She got a lot of social media love last night for how she was handling some of those draft day
She's
interviews.
making them all cry.
Hey, man, I'll give her credit for that because, a lot of the times these stage interviews, they kind of stink. It's like the sideline coach interviews where they don't say anything. To actually get real emotional reactions out of them last night, to sort of, because that does, as much as some of those guys might not try and say it, getting drafted last night is a culmination of a lifetime of work, and that actually does mean a lot to them. So for guys like Zion Williamson and R.J. Barrett to show some emotion there, and that they're not these well-programmed social media robots, I thought it was good on Maria Taylor because that makes me like and appreciate guys like Williamson and Barrett more.
I like her look where she wears the dress with the tennis shoes. I think that really fits her personality really well. I know that tennis shoes are kind of a popular thing now for the gals, but I like the look with the dress and the tennis shoes. It just seems kind of like a cool, laid back thing, and that's kind of the vibe that Maria gives off. Colby Curry says, "What about Eric Gilbert?" Yes, if
Gilbert definitely.
If Gilbert goes, I'd have to go for sure. For sure. All right. Anything else anyone wants to talk about before we leave? It's almost noon. We got to go. Stacy Noble says, "Don't put yourself in the doghouse. Don't do it." Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that. Joel Moody says, "I'm not much on fashion, but the number 5 pick wore a robe to the draft." I didn't see that.
Yeah, Darius Garland. He was getting a lot of Jedi comments.
That's really funny. The NBA draft's always been kind of I'll say a fashion forward event. Pretty sure a very kind of fashion forward event always for the most part. And last night I guess was no exception on that. So I sort of did that thing on Nicholas Claxton before. I was happy to find out that more second round picks have gotten guaranteed money because
it's not a full guarantee, but a lot of them do have partial guarantees.
But what I read is an overwhelming majority at least get 1 year guarantee, and actually a decent amount more have gotten multi-year guarantees. And one of the guys that didn't ended up signing like a 4-year deal the year after that, like a different team or whatever. So, because when I first saw he got drafted number 31 overall, my initial thought was, oh my gosh, this is a disaster, because the fact that, second round picks just used to be
It's a lot harder.
a huge crapshoot.
Still is.
But it sounds like from a money standpoint, he could be an overall better situation, especially being the number 31 pick compared to something else. So I actually
Gonna play with Kyrie Irving next year. I mean, I feel bad for him in that aspect because he's just a head case. But.
Boy, it seems pretty rough. Mike Anderson brings a really good point on this. Claxton, of the guys that I saw, and I guess I'm probably a little biased, I thought his look was about the cleanest of all of them.
Yep.
He did kind of have the red and black thing going, and credit to Reese Davis, who, when they threw to the interview with he and Maria Taylor, did kind of shout out 2 dogs right there, because Maria's obviously UGA grad. So Georgia did get a little love last night, even though I'm guessing Claxton was probably the last guy in the green room.
No, he was not. Well, Bol was.
Oh, that's right. He didn't get drafted like 50th overall or
44th,
something like that.
the Miami Heat.
I think it's kind of an interesting prospect. I think Bol's kind of an interesting prospect. I wouldn't have minded seeing him land in Atlanta in the second round. Joel Moody says, if we get Andrew Rame's commitment, can we get a yes, sir, from the pool out of you?
No.
All right, we're getting this close to – now, listen, I love Andrew Rame, but at this point in time, we're getting pretty close to me just being live at 10 a.m. every single morning from the beach. But, Joel, that is a pretty good idea. A little yes, sir would not be a bad thing. Maybe I can get the 2 Georgia Shakers, the way that Sam Pittman works those as well. We appreciate that comment. All right, let me remind you of this on the way out the door. Make sure you check out AJC.com for your Atlanta news now. And one of the things I've done for years is that sort of like weekend preview stuff that the AJC.com has always been so good at. There's always a ton of things happening around the Atlanta area on the weekend, and a great way to get set up for what's happening there in your neighborhood is by checking that out at AJC.com, and the rest of your Atlanta news now from AJC.com. Hope you'll check that out. As far as our RS Andrews cool down goes, huge thanks to them for making it all possible. Darring the gang do a great job there. Please make sure you check them out online at rsandrews.com. And I will see you back here on Monday. DawgNation Day presented by Kroger. It's been a ton of fun here today. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll talk to you Monday at 10. We'll see you then.